14 days into a brutal war with the United States and Israel, Iran is still firing missiles, drones, and proxy attacks with a ferocity that has perhaps stunned many in the Western establishments. And this, despite losing much of its top leadership in the opening hours of this very conflict. When the first wave of US strikes hit Tehran and other key command nodes on day one, the operation looked chillingly familiar to the destruction of Saddam Hussein's regime in 2003. Decapitate the leadership, blind the command and control systems, and expect the system to collapse in short order. Instead, 2 weeks on, Iran's war machine has fragmented but not fallen. As we can see, the provincial commands continue to launch salvos at US bases, Israeli cities, and Gulf infrastructure. Also remember, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi had warned that bombing in our capital have no impact on Iran's ability to fight. Well, at the heart of this resilience lies a doctrine built by one man, former IRGC chief, Major General Mohammad Jafari, architect of Iran's Decentralized Mosaic Defense. So come along as we tell you everything about what exactly is Iran's Mosaic doctrine and who is the man behind a war plan that helps Iran keep firing in this current conflict. Well, Mohammad Jafari is a former commander-in-chief of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the most powerful arm of Iran's military and main shield of the Islamic Republic. He fought in the Iran-Iraq War in the 1980s, where he saw up close how a weaker country could survive against a stronger enemy by relying on mass mobilization, ideology, and a long grinding war of attrition instead of quick victories. Well, those years shaped his belief that Iran's survival depend not on having the biggest weapons, but on having the strongest ability to absorb pain and keep fighting. In fact, in 2005, Jafari was put in charge of the IRGC Center for Strategic Studies, a kind of internal war lab where Iran's general studied past conflicts and prepared for future ones. From there, he started to deeply study two key experiences: Iran's own war with Iraq in the 1980s and US's invasion of Iraq in 2003. The first showed him how Iran had survived by turning the whole country into a battlefield of resistance, and the second showed him how quickly a regime could fall if all power was concentrated at the top like Saddam Hussein's system in Baghdad. In fact, the 2003 Iraq war was a turning point in his thinking. Jafari watched how Saddam's highly concentrated command structure froze once the American targeted Baghdad and the top leadership. And as a result, commanders in the field were unable to move without Saddam's approval. For Jafari, this was a warning. If Iran kept a similar central model, a US strike on Tehran could one day produce a similar collapse. So sitting inside the IRGC Strategy Center, he began designing the opposite model, a defense system built to survive even if the leadership was completely wiped out. By 2005, he had outlined what would be called as the Mosaic Defense Doctrine, a plan to break the IRGC into many semi-independent provincial commands, each with its own leadership, local militia, and war plans, able to fight on its own, even if cut off from Tehran and the top leadership. When Jafari became IRGC chief in 2007, he had the power to turn this idea into a reality, reorganizing the Guard into 31 provincial units and embedding the doctrine deep into Iran's military structure. Well, Iran's Mosaic Defense Doctrine, formalized around 2005 and rolled out aggressively after Jafari took over the IRGC, is built on one core assumption. In the real war against the United States or Israel, Tehran will lose central control, but the fight must go on regardless. To make that possible, Iran restructured, as I mentioned, IRGC into 31 provincial corps, each with its own command and control, logistic base, intelligence apparatus, and most importantly, standing access to local embedded besieged militia. Each province, as one expert put it, a mosaic, a self-contained piece of a larger picture that can operate separately if cut off from the capital. In fact, the structure is such that authority is pushed down. Mid-level commanders receive broad pre-written instruction and objectives in peacetime, and in wartime, they are expected to act on their own initiative to fulfill their goals, rather than waiting for orders that may never come if the leadership is gone. This decentralization is more than just organizational chart. It's a philosophy of resilience and survival for Iran. Stockpiles of missiles, drones, and ammunition are dispersed across the country, often in hardened underground facilities and tunnels designed to survive heavy and sustained bombardment. Also, besieged units embedded in towns and villages form a localized militia network that can shift from crowd control in peacetime to guerrilla warfare and infrastructure disruption in war times, turning each province into a layered home ground insurgency in waiting. Well, the event of the last 14 days are the Mosaic Doctrine's live fire test and its vindication. When US strikes killed key clerical and military leaders including Ali Khamenei and hammered central nodes in Tehran and other major cities, provincial IRGC commands did not wait for new directives. They executed standing war plans almost immediately. As you remember, missiles and drones were launched from multiple areas against US bases in Iraq and the Gulf, Israeli ports and airfields, and critical energy and transport infrastructure from Saudi Arabia to the UAE and Qatar. And this was because every provincial corps comes with its own mini-military, intelligence, logistics, strike assets, and access to local besieged manpower, which means no single blow can disable the entire system. In fact, Araghchi's assertion that bombing in our capital have no impact on Iran's ability to fight was not a bluster. It was a literal description of a defense posture that assumes that capital will be hit. Strategically, Mosaic defense aims less at outright victory than at making defeat impossible. In fact, drawing on theories of protracted war and their own attritional experiences in the 1980s, Iranian planners bet that if they can keep the conflict going by raising economic cost, unsettle global energy markets, and strain Western political will. In that calculus, time, geography, and cost asymmetry are Iran's real weapons. The decentralized architecture is what allows those weapons to be brought to bear even after catastrophic losses at the top. But at the same time, decentralization carries its own danger. Analysts have long warned that empowering provincial commanders and militia to act semi-independently raises the risk of miscalculation, rogue operation, and most dangerously, escalatory spiral, especially in sensitive theaters like the Strait of Hormuz. Already fragmented decision-making has produced a patchwork of attacks that may not always align with any single political strategy in Tehran, complicating both de-escalation and diplomacy.